Hi, hi again. Uh, Getting very good at shooting like three, four, five videos at a time. The goal is to reach 1,000. Fuck, man. I imagine only the things that I have to kind of like start considering that I don't in order for me to kind of create some conversation about it. And every time I'm shooting for 10 minutes at least. I read it somewhere. I'm sure around like my 80 or 100, I would have like gotten comfortable with a certain like format of how I speak, and then maybe over there I'd be able to kind of like read more about how YouTube videos kind of like succeed and don't succeed and that kind of stuff. So I don't know if you consider that playing it safe or if you consider that just winging it. But anyways, this video is about personal brands. Not a brand that's personal to you, but the personal brand that people kind of reveal. And I met a guy and he sent me a message. He sent me a post and he goes like, "Hey, my guy, I want to post this on LinkedIn. Can you give me some snippet to write about?" And I go like, "Cool. It's supposed to have been that easy." But it wasn't, because I love to ask questions. So my question was simple. What's the purpose? Oh, it says that I'm gonna be in Italy and I'm gonna be in this kind of like, what do they call them? Event for like the traders and all that stuff. And we go like, oh, cool, man, you're going to these events as a trader. Like, props to you. He's thinking more how he represents his company and all that stuff, which led to more questions. Of course, because even though a single post doesn't fucking matter, but the reality is that the only post you're going to be having? How many posts do you plan on having? What are you trying to represent in these posts? So I started drilling in these questions until he got frustrated. And then I was like, okay, I'll make you a deal. I'll help you out with this one time. But if you're going to approach this any other time, your job is you're going to have to spend at least 3 hours with me. And my goal was simple, to create some form of branding strategy for him. And that was the actual, like, my intention. It was like, if you're going to do this, man, let's create something that we can base all our action on. And so I started basically having a conversation with him, and like the next day we took like an actual an hour, and 2 days ago we took an hour, and I'm hoping this week we can get the last hour. And the idea was like any branding statement goes through like the certain phases where you have to kind of like you have to discuss the values, you have to discuss your principles, you have to discuss the mission statement, you have to discuss goals, you have to discuss your tagline, and relatively simple stuff, but all of them kind of have to be harmonious because like that's what you're representing to the client, to the customer, to your user, whatever it is you're trying to do. These are things that are very much like that's what they linger with. And ultimately you kind of have to decide on an archetype that you want to kind of like be as your company or as your own personal brand. And from there you have to decide on who your customer base is. And what's the last one? What's the last one? Come on, Tari, you can do it. Sorry, it's raining, so I got distracted. I'll get to that later. But so I sat with him, I started having conversations with him, and like it was funny because naturally every time he said something, I reflected on my own principles, right? Ah, tone of voice. Tone of voice is the last thing you kind of you have to look into because every single thing you say, the way you say it, is also a representation. And it's 100% true because I know for myself the way I speak very much represents me. Forget the words I use, just the way I speak, the way I interact with people, and the way I present myself. I say hi, all these things kind of represent me. And it makes sense that we represent a company in a certain kind of way that people could relate to because ultimately it's a living organism that we interact with. We are in the age of AI, so I can say that without people going like, no, it's the people. It is, but like everyone's working towards the missions of the company, the goals of the company, the targets of the company, and every person in the company is supposed to be a representation of all these values, all these everything the company stands for should be represented by each and every employee or a consultant working there, or whatever. So I really believe that needs to be the case. But if you're in a company and you're not necessarily representing what this company is about, then there is no harmony. You're just there for a job, which means when the time comes and you need to be relied on, there's a high chance you're not going to pull through. You wouldn't know how to pull through. So having a job versus working are two separate things for me. And you need the people that just do the job, and you need people that basically work and every day figure out what they need to do differently. And that's basic. That's in a weird way. That's how I started applying basically how a company could succeed when I started my startup. I started kind of like reading all about these things that a company needs to succeed, and I realized that I kind of like have to apply them on myself in order for me to succeed. So when the startup thing kind of like slowed down and I ended up writing the code myself, so it's no longer a company, it became a platform and I have to build a platform for people to use it in order to show it to people and then eventually it turns into a startup again. So I basically took everything I learned over there. That was not everything, whatever I learned over there, and I started applying it to myself and I started basically growing out of it. So talking to this guy about his personal brand, about the image he's trying to, because he's the one who's going and representing the company. So everything the company does is represented by him. He's the CEO, which means everything we build around him is going to be translated into the company. And the more I spoke to him, the more I kind of like started reflecting on my values, my principles. And I've written my business model. I mean, a couple of times before. I've written my branding statement, my personal branding statement, a couple of times before. But I never once considered how impactful it can be until I started discussing it with him. And I realized the struggles I was going through answering certain questions when I started talking to him. And now that I'm mentioning it to you guys, I really want to go back and write it from scratch again without looking at the old one and maybe even compare to see if like what I truly actually wrote came from the core or just something that I thought would be a good thing to have, right? Because we all have a certain image of ourselves, but it doesn't necessarily reflect our true selves most of the time. Some of the time, the one time it doesn't represent our true selves, that's more than significant. And so to reflect back on this is what I was trying to like when I was talking to him and I was trying to convince him to do this, and it was like not like I didn't care for money, I didn't care for anything. I'm like, just give me your time, man. Let me set it up for you. And from there, it doesn't fucking matter. Anything you ask me, I know exactly how to actually like do it, and I can. There are many ways we can work on this to make it a success. I really don't fucking care if there's something you want to do. I'm interested in like supporting. And I'm not supporting you, I'm supporting the concept that you're trying to build. I'm supporting the business you're trying to push through. Supporting people is not necessarily like a positive thing. I really believe that people need to feel like they're supported, but don't really need support. It's the feeling that comes from support. And most support comes in the form of help. That's a conversation for later. But so we get back and forth with the brand statement. There's still the target customers that I have to talk to him about in order for us to understand if next time we're actually like designing the posts or anything he's trying to kind of like go through, how are we going to actually like who are we targeting? And naturally, because I know how to do Facebook ads and I know how to do like I took a course in online marketing, then I'll be able to help him with that as well. Not help him with that as well. I don't like the word help, but I'll be able to like be the person that fills in the gaps for him to understand differently better or any of that shit. Hey, there needs to be a word for that, right? And I think the word is help, but the problem is it's been abused. And I think help is just get something that I don't want to do it, you do it. That's help. My word of choice is always guidance because but guidance always comes with like I'll guide you so you can do it. But most of the time, if you're doing a job for somebody else, it's considered helping. But I really don't think it has to be because I could just be doing the job because I want to do it. Not because necessarily it helps you, just because I get excited for this shit. I do. But anyways, discussing the personal brand, how would an individual representing himself actually choose his style? How would he choose his? I mean, like you're supposed to know your values, but how would you be able to kind of like reflect back on them and until you realize your true self? Because your ideal self should be a true representation of who you are and what you want to be. And these values and principles that are like essential for the brand identity, like when somebody looks at you, they're gonna see all that stuff. They have to. If they don't, that means you haven't kind of like reached your ideal self, or you haven't reached a stage where you're impactful enough for people to remember, notice, and all that stuff about you. I'm asking this question out loud. I'm thinking about it. And while having this conversation, I realized I have to rewrite my personal brand statement myself in order for me to be able to gauge the distance between me and myself. I think that'll be a good fucking exercise. I don't know, man. Any advice on how personal brands could actually be approached? I really have nothing more to say. I think I came to the conclusion midway, but I wanted to elaborate more on it. Thank you for bearing with me.